up then the measure of your father. Ye serpents, ye offspring of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zacharias, son of Verily.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing the Gospel of Luke. Now, we're in the section of Luke where he goes through the same woes to the Pharisees as he does in Matthew, or similar anyways. It's a different occasion, so the account is different. The setting is different. And just like, the thing is, a lot of times when you have parallel passages, a lot of times people assume they come from the same, they come from the same source, obviously, the Lord himself, but they assume they must be the same incident because they tell this a similar set of information. But for anything to be memorable enough for it to make down into the gospel, aside from the Holy Spirit helping out, even, a lot of the, Luke, for them, it's, remember he said that we were eyewitnesses. So it's going to be things that, very often, I'm sure these are the kind of things he repeated on a number of occasions. I have certain things I repeat very often, and every teacher must find themselves repeating themselves. Ask a teacher, do you ever repeat yourself? And of anything, anyone who teaches anything is going to find themselves repeating things, because people who are learning things need to be told things more than once. The only thing I hope is that sometimes I don't repeat things that are already well remembered, but sometimes even if you remember it, the most important things have to be repeated again and again just to emphasize their importance. So, all right, my thing is not the right shape. It's because I use this for other things. Just a notepad. That's the miracle of the text. And we're seeing guys on TV, like, how do they get the text up there? Not really knowing much. But nowadays it's just go download OBS Studio and away you go, I guess. All right, so woe to you, for you build the sepulchres of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. They're all connected, but I'm not going to overmuch go back over the ones we've already gone over. He had turned to the lawyers who said, you reproach us also. And so saying, and indeed reproaching all hypocrites for all time, not just the Pharisees and the lawyers of Jesus' day, but down to this day, we have always with us the specter of hypocrisy and of this, we today we talk about revisionist history. I don't know if that's the right word for this. I don't think so. Well, it's a very strong tendency right now where we look back on the past, even the very recent past, and we will condemn people who came just before us, who lived in different times than us, for what they did, and we will extol our own virtues. I try not to do this, but it's rampant in our society. People will talk about, they'll look back at something someone said 30 years ago or 40 years ago and say, oh, what an awful person is. Also, you get the whole thing when they talk about how horrible our country has been, they'll say. And I'm not making that statement. Every country has its ups and downs, for sure. There's no country that's ever been perfect on the face of the earth. But there's no country that's ever been better than some in many ways, and done more than others to atone for past mistakes. And but the thing is, the people who lived in those times, like they'll say about, like our founding fathers will say, oh, well, they owned slaves. It's like, what would you do? You know, you're so holy and sure that you would, if you inherited some, if you'd grown up with it and inherited a bunch, you would have just been like so modern and, 2020 in your attitude about it. Yeah. And so because they have inherited values that we don't, they will look back at the past and spit down on the shoulders of the giants whom they stand on. I will spit on the giants on whose shoulders they're standing and say, I wouldn't have been like that. I would have been so much better. If I was back in those days, I would have put a stop to it, or whatever it is they think virtues they think they possess. Never mind that those virtues they gained by living in these times. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you think the way you think very often because of the things that are known and believed now. It's not like you can go back to the 17th century and say, I'd explain to them all about nuclear fusion. I'd explain to them all about, if I was born back then, I would have invented the steam engine much sooner. I mean, why wait so long? I mean, you have everything you need right there. Or the steam engine, or the internal combustion engine. I mean, I'm good at working on cars. Surely I could have invented something like that. And so also with the evil they do, they say, then there's those who, generally that's not quite what Jesus is talking about, isn't it? It's a similar spirit. But he's talking about people who will look back at the past and, it is exactly what they do. They'll say they'll look back at the past, and they'll say, if we had been in those times, we wouldn't have been like those. And they put garlands on the sepulchres of the martyrs and people who suffered. The suffering. They'll wrap themselves in the suffering of slaves, in the suffering of other people who are oppressed. They'll wrap themselves in it. Say, I stand up for the oppressed. And they're so much better. And I think, and it comes down to nowadays they show themselves better by simply hating the people who came before them, which does nothing. It doesn't do anything. Simply saying, I don't know, it's hard to get out of my head the way things are today. But I want to step away because I'm getting too much into there's a lot of anti-white sentiment and stuff like that. And I don't really want to go into it too much because I don't want to make this about that kind of thing. Let's talk instead about Jesus, right? You look at people like I remember when I looked at Thomas, doubting Thomas, and he said, I won't believe till I stick my fingers in his wounds. And the Lord Jesus said, blessed are you for believing, but you've believed because you've seen. But it says, Thomas, you believe having seen. That's what he said, not believe. But blessed are they who believe without seeing. I remember reading that and thinking to myself, that's how I want to be. I want to believe without ever seeing nothing. I want to be faithful. This is a young, I would think I was probably 15, 16, somewhere in there. And also I read about David, how, what did David do? Not David, Solomon. God told him he could ask whatever he wants, and he asked for wisdom. I said, give me that wisdom. I don't want riches. I don't want, I don't know since then I've ever regretted my wisdom, but I might have from time to time regretted forswearing riches. Or at least, maybe not have been so adamant. But, what I'm saying? So we could look at Peter and see him walking on the water and say, why did he doubt? The Lord was right there. I wouldn't have doubted. If Jesus holding my hand, walking on the water, not me, I'm a super believer. And, and it's great to aspire to strong faith. But it's very easy when you're young to think along those lines, to think you're so much better because you see it all clearly. Because as my father said, and this is a lesson he repeated easily 1,000 times. What he used to say, hindsight is 20/20, meaning you can be so right after the fact. Oh wow, you're right after it matters. Good for you. After it matters, after the moment of truth, when the time of decision came on, and the truth is, eventually, when I asked for the Holy Spirit, I wanted to stick my fingers metaphorically into Jesus' wounds. I mean, I wanted him to make me know he was real. I wanted that for sure. That's what I wanted. I ended up needing that. And in the end, I'm not much different than Thomas. As much as I'd want to be a much more faithful person, I'm not. And the reason Thomas is in the scriptures is so that people who are not utterly full of faith can have an example to look at and say, well, Thomas doubted. So it's possible, though Jesus encouraged us to have faith and doubt not, even those with some doubts, not an absolute skeptic. Someone's like, I don't believe nothing. But it's like, the resurrection was a fantastic claim, and he wanted some fantastic proof. Isn't that what they say? Fantastic claims need fantastic proofs. That's what the atheists are always, again and again saying over and over. Well, yeah, I mean, I understand. They don't absolutely need, we can believe things without fantastic proof. We do all the time. And people deny this, but it's like, you couldn't function in life if you didn't go based on, I think it's probably right. Yeah, sometimes life just requires you to make decisions without having absolute proof. And there is no such thing as absolute proof outside of, like, geometry. I can prove a triangle of angles, 30, and I can prove that the, hypotenuse, the length of the hypotenuse of a triangle with, sides 4 and 5. Let's do a 2-3 triangle. A 2-3 gives you what? 4. No, that's not a good one. It's 3. Is it the 3, 4, 5, 9, 16? Yeah, and 25. So a 3, 4, 5 triangle. I can prove that a triangle with sides of 3 and 4, that the hypotenuse is 5. And I could prove a lot more things in geometry, apparently, or at least I used to be able to, but I think I hated it so much. But I do have my old geometry notebook. I remember doing proofs. And apparently some things can be proven. And they say things can be proven logically. That's another abstraction, though. But as far as in the world, there's barely anything such as real proof. Proof with which there's no doubt. Most of what people call proof is evidence. Evidence that they are willing to accept as proving a fact, even though that is actually a provisional statement. You know what I mean? And if you don't, it's all right. It's not really important. But the point is, people are very self-approving. They want to approve themselves, to make much of themselves among other men. They want to lift themselves up. And we all want to think, if we'd been in Jesus' day, we wouldn't have been one of those people screaming, crucify him. We really want to believe that about ourselves. But what you have to, I think it's important as a Christian, understand it's like, that except for the grace of God, they say, but for the grace of God, there go I. You've heard that? Perhaps that's a little statement, that sentiment. It's very true. Except for God showing me mercy, opening my eyes to the gospel, allowing me to see the truth of what is being claimed, I might have been just caught up in some other truth in my mind and really unable to see the truth that Jesus was telling. Maybe I'd invested my entire life in Phariseeism, all right? In the way of the Pharisees is probably a better way to say it. I'd invested my entire life, my career, my children, my family. It was all Pharisees, and if there's a reason that people that follow them were fishermen. They weren't as well educated. people will make fun of people without education very often. They'll say most of, like the president, right? They'll say most of Donald Trump's supporters are uneducated. That's not very impressive to me, because the things you get from education is just what they stuff into your head. It doesn't make you smarter. It doesn't make you a better decision maker. It doesn't make you a better critical thinker, especially because in most educational institutions, they aren't teaching critical thinking. You know what I mean? It's something you either pick up along the way, or maybe your parents teach it to you, or whatever. But I think I felt like some classes I had in high school, it was trying to get us to think critically. I don't know, but a lot of what people learn is to regurgitate what they're told, and so education becomes really a matter of indoctrinations. It's like saying these people aren't indoctrinated in our ways. It's not that they're not educated. The fishermen are very well educated in the realms of fishing. I mean, they know their business. You don't have to be an expert in international law to be able to hear the gospel, which is primarily a moral, question. It's about it's about right and wrong. It's about the truth. It's about the sacrifice of Jesus. But it's not necessarily about the things they taught you in school. And so the things you got taught in school can get in the way. And as far even the things you learn in the seminary or in the, it's like they can fill our heads full of facts about religion and the faith, but somehow we haven't quite gotten down to the most important aspects of faith. Like Jesus said, you've been very careful to do all the minor things of the law, but you've neglected judgment and the love of God. And again, the love of God, we didn't talk much about it then because it was near the end of a study, but it's not just like the love of God is like, we treat it like it's such a simple thing. Well, the love of God loves everybody. Yes, but exactly how? How does he love everybody? In what way does he show his love towards everybody? You know what I mean? And how can we see God's love? Like, I had someone writing me on the comment section in another video. It's not something you can look up here, but like they were saying, this is from some old comment a long time ago, and there's something about predestination, and they said, and they were saying, if you believe in that predestination, it's pointless to pray. Prayer becomes meaningless. And I'm like, I don't know. When everything in my life is ordained of God, I think that kind of makes it meaningful. Everything. It makes everything meaningful. That means everything has some meaning and purpose. And, people forget that the Protestant work ethic, the idea that each man in his vocation is doing something meaningful and important in the overall schema of God, is something that came out of the Protestant Reformation, especially out of Calvinism. And I'm not a Calvinist. But there are a lot of things about that are correct. And and the comment was basically, at first they said prayer has no meaning, and then they said, well, I don't want to, they weren't so concerned about the meaning of prayer. It was the meaning of evil. And they thought evil was somehow better categorized as a result of human free will. But there is much evil in the world which is not the result of human free will, manifestly. And also, even if it is the result of human free will, the fact that what is human free will capable of? Anything? Not quite anything. So, like some people have these sort of limitations, governors on what they're willing to do. Some people have less governor. And I refer to governors because I used to drive a truck with a governor on it. And a governor means like it limits the speed the vehicle can go. So you get up to 65, and then no matter how much you press the accelerator, it just won't go faster. Well, then there were ways you could trick it when you go over a hill or something like that. Get a lot of it, right at 64. If you go, and then you can get rolling up to 68. So everybody's not necessarily the same. They have different, but God has to love in a world where there are children being raped and murdered. And the love of God has to be fit into that. Where is the love of God? Like that one song that Edmund Fitzgerald, right, by, I forget his name, right? Does anyone know where the love of God goes? When the waves turn the minutes to hours. The moments when you're in terror and for your life, and he's saying, where's the love of God? Or in that cartoon I bring up about, I'm not going to bring it up, I almost did, about Noah's Ark. Where's the love of God? God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, and all the people are drowning in the water. And God's love is not just a simplistic thing. There's a reason why he listed it as something important to talk about. Like I said, I've kind of teased the whole thing here. I'm not going to go into a digression on the love of God in this context. But if you haven't listened to it, on oraclesofgod.org, my website, right, I have a study called The Love of God, which I do recommend. And I actually have many studies that actually do go into a bit of, sorry, that's the wrong, whatever. I was like going to go, it's going to be like, there you go. The love of God. It's down here at number 11. See? Except this is too wide. Okay. Oh, that's weird. There we go. Everything's just a little better now. Okay. So now, we'll leave that there. And we'll go back to, sorry. It's hard to do that it's hard to continue talking while I'm managing the production. Okay, so truly you bear witness that you allow the deeds of your father, for they indeed kill them, and you build their sepulchres. You built the sepulchres of the prophets and the sepulchres of your fathers. Oh, no, I'm sorry. They killed them. They killed the prophets, and you build the prophets' sepulchres. Like, in a sense, you're taking responsibility for it. And I can't get away from the sort of the race issue in America is a big deal lately. And it's weird because when I was young, I thought we were at the end of all that stuff. Like I remember being in the 80s in grade school reading about Martin Luther King Jr. and we had Martin Luther King Jr. Day come around, and I remember we had black kids in our class, and I didn't really know any of them, but it's like it seemed like I was like, oh, okay, there they are. And I went to museums, and I'd run into, and in college I had one friend. I think I've only had one black friend in my whole life, and then about two acquaintances. So, it's just the way things are. But I mean, I thought, I've seen people video making, I'm like, we're all basically the same, right? And I thought by this time, that'd all be over. 2020. And it's like bigger than ever. It seems ridiculous. And it's just being made ridiculous by certain people. It's mostly driven by a lot of self-hating white folks, honestly. I don't blame black people for this. There's some people who profit off of racism, like it's their business almost. So they don't want it to go away. Like racial grievance becomes like their business, and it's like most people aren't like that. Most people are just trying to live their lives. But people who like, and to point this out about certain people though, like, they're Mr. like, what great crusaders they are for, justice, racial justice and stuff. And it's like, and most of what they're doing is just trying to hate on themselves and other people. As far as themselves, in a sense, is essentially their own heritage, their own race. It's like, all my ancestors, it's like, yes, I'm white, but all my ancestors were from Maine, and they fought on the side of the North. I have a blood-stained Civil War Bible for my ancestors who shed blood to free the slaves. You know what I mean? It's like, why? You know what I mean? In like Jim Crow in the South, nobody in my family ever came from the South. And it's like, well, you inherit the benefits of being. I'm like, I guess. I thought we tried to fix that. I remember in the 80s they had affirmative action, and that was just supposed to help. I think it did actually. Like, nobody, help people get jobs. Is there still people who get discriminated against? Of course there is. It's like, that's everything. I get discriminated against. People just don't like me because of the way I look. Around here they don't like me because of my name, because I'm not. They don't know that I'm probably more German than they are. You know what I mean? They think, they hear my name and they think, oh, ethnic, and I don't look right. Don't look right. I understand that. I think that's human nature. People are tribal, and it's wrong. So, and then they do evil, and then their ancestors say, oh, I wouldn't have, we wouldn't have done that, as they, when they garnish the sepulchres of the prophets. All right, that's enough of that. I spent way too much time on those couple verses. Therefore also said the wisdom of God, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they shall slay and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, may be required of this generation. Therefore also said the wisdom of God, I will send them prophets. See, because here's what happens. People, they look at the past and they have 20/20 hindsight, and they say, well, I see that was wrong. Racism is bad. It was a bad thing to do, of course. I mean, even people who they say, even people I don't agree with, there's plenty of racists, whatever. But let's say it's agreed it's bad. And then they go, and then new prophets come along, right, saying that, yeah, now what you're doing is bad. Like, you shouldn't turn around then and spit on, it's like, both the persecutors and the persecuted, it doesn't heal anything to then turn around and punish the ancestors of men who did wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, white folks, like, it would be like saying, like, white folks in the South, or any white folks in general, they need to suffer because of their ancestors held slaves. It's like a lot of them, most of the people in the South, their ancestors never held slaves. They weren't that wealthy. But maybe they fought it in the Civil War for slavery. Okay. And so their ancestors, their descendants should forever after be, it's like, that's also a form of like slavery. Like they're good. They deserve it because that's what they did they never did nothing to nobody. It's like saying what if someone was sold into servitude for being a criminal? And that happens very often. Criminals are forced into labor camps. We do this to this day, right? They're not, they get paid like ridiculously low wages, like work all day, 8 hours in prison and get like, $5 or something, or whatever. I know they get sometimes a little something, but they get barely anything. And, they're in prison. They're supposed to be being punished. They're not supposed to be just working their lives away. And I don't know if that's, I'm not any kind of expert on how prison and that kind of, the system of penalizing and also trying to reform people at the same time. I don't know how that ought to work. I have no idea. But I do know we do this, and most people think, yeah, well, hey, they committed crimes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But I mean, do you think then, like, forever after their children should have the same, should have to work, maybe their children should be imprisoned also? Because their fathers were such criminals? Maybe if a father does a lot of bad things and hurt, like, what if some guy has a family and then he goes around and he kills a bunch of other people's families, like their kids, right? Why not then? Shouldn't his ancestors then all have to suffer and pay for it? I mean, they've profited from it. I mean, they just. I remember, people talk about World War II, and this may seem like a weird thing to say, but it has to do with fathers and prophets and history, and that's what all this has to do. Is makes me think of history, because it's sort of like, and if it seems like a strange digression, and all these digressions seem a bit strange, it really isn't, because we're talking about history and the way people look at history and the way people think of themselves in light of history. They don't do it properly. We're going to tell you how you should look at yourself in light of history. But like World War II, people say, oh, Hitler, bad. That's all bad, right? Holocaust, bad. Just all the war, bad. Etc. Right? I mean, do I need to say anymore? Everybody knows that's bad. Most people, right? But like, so I've heard people say, oh, I'd go back in time and stop it. I'd like to go back in time and assassinate Hitler before he did all that evil. Or my brother, or a friend of mine, let's say a family friend who's Jewish, was talking about how, the Holocaust had such an impact on his life and his family, et cetera, et cetera. And how it's still, to this day, people are like, ooh, it's like, it's so, it like destroyed our lives. And I'm sorry. No Jew today who didn't live through it has any real claim to it. You know what I mean? Just like blacks who if you didn't live through slavery, you don't really have a claim to slavery. If you didn't live through Jim Crow, you don't really have a claim to Jim Crow. And Jews who didn't live through the Holocaust don't really have a claim to it. Let me tell you why. Because the Holocaust made you. Jim Crow made you. You know what I mean? Especially things like the wars and the Holocaust and stuff. If Hitler hadn't killed all those people, it wouldn't have made room for me and you and the rest of us who are alive today. And though we shouldn't praise what he did, by any means, it was evil, he shouldn't have done it. Doing it affected history. Like, my father and mother my mother probably would never have been born if it wasn't for the war, and my father and mother never would have met. And I would never exist. Like, all the horrible things that happened throughout history, it's stupid to spit down on them because they made you who's able to do that. You wouldn't be a conscious being walking around on this planet to complain about it if it hadn't been for that. You know what I mean? If the wicked slave traders hadn't gone over to Africa and plucked up all these people and brought them over to the continent and shuffled them up, a lot of them were from tribes that would kill each other, I suppose, right? I mean, I don't know, right? But they're from all different parts of Africa, right? It's not just all one area. You know what I mean? People were kidnapped, taken from their families, taken from their homes, and brought over, and they went through a horrible ordeal, passing over the ocean in chains and miserable, horrible conditions, not even fit for animals. You know what I mean? They suffered such awful things, but you don't get to wrap yourself in their suffering. You know what I mean? You just don't, because you didn't do it. You live in a nice place, with in probably the nicest country that ever exists, nicer than any country in Africa currently, quite frankly, or any, and this is not just, I'm just saying, like I said, the Holocaust too, it's like, oh, the Holocaust. Or if I had something to complain about, I don't got my ancestors, what am I going to say? Now, like everyone hates us now, and I fear, I do think in the future, it's like if this hatred towards certain people, towards white folks continues, in 40, 50 years, maybe people will start killing us. I don't know. And if I'm not, but only the people who suffer those things have the right to wrap themselves in that suffering. You know what I mean? You don't get to garnish the sepulchres of the prophets until you suffer like the prophets. And so what God does to show this is he sends modern prophets to tell you what you're doing wrong now. You know what I mean? Like to say, they were kidnapped, They were put in chains. They were brought across the sea in a Holocaust in which hundreds of thousands, if not millions, died. I don't know what the numbers of, in the passage across the Atlantic as far as slaves. I know there's estimates that go into the millions, all right? I don't know. I would think they would want to not lose too many. You don't want to have your whole, if it's a cargo of slaves, dead slaves, though they get pitched overboard, no doubt, unceremoniously. That's how they bury people at sea, period, anyways, right? But, though many would die in the passage, and they couldn't, it was probably cheaper than taking care of them. On some level, if your whole cargo died, you made the journey for nothing. You can't have all your slaves die, right? So, but I mean, whatever. A lot of people, but the thing is, this was no luxury cruise, right? They suffered so many things coming over. And at the time, there were people saying, that's wrong. There was the abolitionists in this, and people didn't want to listen to them at first, but eventually they did. And so in different times, where people come along and say, that's what's wrong with society right now. Talking about grievances of the past is so easy. And wrapping yourself in the mantle of like, oh, I'm so righteous. You know why? I know that was bad what they did. I know that was really bad. Evil. And that's what makes me good. It makes you short of a moron. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it definitely, being able to look back and say like, yeah, that was bad, is not any kind of virtue. It's some kind of virtue, isn't it? It's a very small virtue. It's a very cheap, easy virtue. The hard virtue is to take a look at yourself and say like, no, and this is what the meaning is, I would have been right in there with them, but for the grace of God. I would have been maybe not the first one casting the stone, because God knows that's not me now either. But once the crowd was going, I would be like, hold on, John, what are you doing? This is a human being. You would stone a man for such a thing? Or, it's like, what's wrong with you? Like, even though it's not like they're going to throw you in there and stone you too. They might just look at you like, yeah, we'll talk later. We're busily stoning someone. We're stoning this madman who speaks, you're not going to talk sense. Most people won't. Rarely people will. People they'll watch a movie like Schindler's List about the Holocaust and want to identify with Schindler. How many Schindlers were there? Well, there were a few, weren't there? There were a few. I know someone who's, the Jews have designations for people who were heroic in saving Jews from the Holocaust and protecting them from the Nazis, who killed millions and millions of them. It was 6 million, what the number is, whatever. Right? Yeah. And those people who did that heroic thing, they have the right to wrap themselves in their heroism of the deeds they did. But it's like, do people of the same nation have the right to say like, this Dutch guy here, he was heroically saving Jews and protecting them in his home and helping them escape the Nazis. I'm gonna sneeze. He was quite a fellow. So all Dutchmen should take pride and credit for what he did. You know what I mean? Even though most of them were actually handing the Jews over in order to please the Nazis every chance they got. Or what? I'm not saying that about Dutch people. Forgive me. I don't know exactly what the history. I've just picked anything. It's just an example. What I'm saying is, every man's got to answer for his own deeds, now or the past. You can't wrap yourself in a group identity and say like, oh, I wouldn't have done what my fathers did. You can't have your. Here's the thing. People are very proud of their heritage very often. My fathers, like we talk about the founding fathers, right? And people identify the founding fathers. These are the fathers of our country. They're sort of spiritual fathers, since most of us aren't related to them. And people will take pride in that, And to some degree, there is a sense of national pride. It's like the virtue you get from seeing the past as wrong. you can take a little bit. You get a little tiny bit of, I feel good about being part of that. You can't build your whole identity around another man's deeds. You can't build your righteousness around being able to point out another man's wickedness. Your righteousness has to come from your own willingness to listen to the prophets of God when they speak in your time and when they condemn you in your iniquity. Every man's got to answer for the things he's done in his own body, not the things done in some other time, not his opinion about what other people did in history. Until you've been tested, until you've been put through the same situations with the same pressures. And here's the sad part, is like, we go through our little virtue tests all the time, and we fail them, and we don't know it, and our descendants will condemn us. You know what I mean? I'm well, I'm not going to use that as an example. I don't want to use something I don't believe in for an example. I was thinking like, because like, in the future they're going to look back and say, why didn't they do something about the climate? I don't think they will. If anything, they're going to say like, all their tinkering only made things worse, perhaps. They'll say during the time of hysteria, they thought they were doing well. Anyways, it's important to have a good look at history and understand what happened and learn from it, but do not take virtue from it. There's no, that was wrong. I would never do such a thing. It's so cheap and easy to say that. And so God sends prophets into this generation so that all the blood which was shed may be required of this generation. It's not just, you could say of Jesus' generation because Jesus himself was there, the ultimate prophet, prophesying, and that the cumulative blood of all the prophets could be summed up in him. And that's one way to look at it. But in a sense, now we have even more. You know what I mean? Like, we can look back on the prophets, and we can look back on the Lord and the apostles and all the martyrs and the Reformation and the war. We have so much more history and such a better record of history. You know what I mean? That when in our generation we get ready to repeat history and do something stupid again, you know what I mean? And we kill, and the prophets rise up and they're slain, if that's where it goes. A lot of times here's the thing. When society gets ready to do something really evil, prophets rise and they are slain. Because when you get into the mode where you're going to do evil and you're going to do it, it's like when people spoke out against the Nazis, they also ended up in concentration camps. Most of the heroic people were doing it secretly. A prophet is the opposite of secret help. Prophets get killed. Maybe they're not as useful, but here's the thing, if nobody speaks up, you know what I mean? If nobody says nothing, it's one thing. Here's the thing, they look at Schindler and they look at other people who were the Jews called just persons, right? Who saved some Jews, 5 or 6 each, or Schindler, right? Many he saved people from the Holocaust, right? Well, if more men had spoken up sooner and more vocally, endangering and maybe laid their lives down, because here's the thing is like when they have the police and stuff, you speak out publicly, it's different. You're doing a lot by secretly helping, and maybe you accomplish more in a sense. But those who speak out openly against things, like there was people who ran printing presses and tried to speak out against the Nazis, and they were killed. They were killed. It's like that's what happens when you speak out. And so it is a far braver thing to do because you are sticking your neck out. is a far more useful thing to do, because people who speak up, that's why freedom of speech is so important to me and to everyone, and it ought to be. Because when you speak up against tyranny, against evil, you draw the attention of the evildoers, but you also rally your allies. You know what I mean? And so it's important to speak so that people know. I remember I learned this about education with children. Like, they talk about class sizes with kids, and like, there's an ideal class size, but it's not really small. Real small classes ends up being like what I have, which is a family affair. They act like family, and in a school you don't need that. It's bad. In a school setting, you have to have a certain number of kids. Otherwise, people don't feel like they can talk. Because when they raise their hand to ask a question, they need to feel like there are a certain critical mass, a number of kids in the room who are about the same place as they are. So if they ask a question, they want to feel like other people are wondering the same thing. So like, let's say the teacher's explaining something, and I raise my hand and say, I don't get it. Why is that like that? Or how do you do this? And now some other kid who didn't ask the question is sitting there and thinking like, whew, that's just what I was thinking. I thought I was stupid. I guess I'm not stupid. And I see other kids kind of like leaning in to listen to the explanation, because, and like there's one or two the nerdy kids maybe rolling their eyes like, oh, it's all simple. You know what I mean? It's like, maybe there's some of that, but they realize it's like, oh no. Actually, like maybe half the people here wanted to ask that question. And so when you speak up and tell the truth, especially in God as a prophet, and I'm using a lot of worldly examples because it's human nature. We're talking about the enemies of God. They behave along human nature. And sometimes to bring in modern examples is important, because you can see trends and where things may be headed for the future. Who knows? I don't know what the future is going to bring. But as great as it is to secretly help out a few families, it'd be better if all the people who opposed the evil that was being done spoke up. Maybe there'd be enough agreement to stop it. If everyone who opposed it would open their mouths. You know what I mean? So it's important to open your mouth. It's important to speak. It's important to do those things. So while it is great to help people, and like I said, ultimately, like I said before, years later, you don't get to, like when the Holocaust basically is responsible for you being born, because the families split up, people died, some people didn't have ancestors, people remarry, it goes like, all this, the mixing war has, not just the Holocaust, just the whole war. I mean, if so many young men hadn't died, certain people wouldn't have been born. Like I said, it's like, it made people move around. People are out of the way. You know what I mean? Like, I met my wife in a particular place at a particular time. Enough people get in the way of that, it changes things. Can't go back and change. All you can do is learn from it. Maybe not repeat the same mistakes, because you don't want to be... Here's the thing. I don't want to change what history has in it. I just want to not do the same things that I know are bad. Right? That's all we can do. Not if we had been in the days of our father, we wouldn't do as they did. We will do in our generation what is right. That's what the attitude we need to have. Is like, we want to do right in our generation. And, and by saying, we look back, we know we spit on them, you condemn yourself when you do the same things. The blood of all the prophets, from the blood of Abel, verse 51, to the blood of Zacharias, which perished between the altar of and the temple. Verily I say unto you, it shall be required of this generation. So, Zacharias, son of Barachias, that's not an Old Testament reference, as I recall. not of Zechariah the prophet, but another Zechariah. or Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom he slew between the temple and the altar. I have no notes on that right now, and I think I used to. I don't remember. But it was one, obviously he's referring from, it's interesting it goes from Abel to Zacharias, A to Z, from beginning to end. So from Abel, the first righteous man slain in the world, the first innocent blood shed, and to Zacharias, which is transliteration of the Greek form of the word Zechariah. And he perished between the altar and the temple. He was killed. He was a prophet prophesying between the temple and the altar of God and the temple. He died right there in the temple. They killed him in the holy place. And people don't want to be responsible for it, but then they want to claim virtue and put flowers on the graves of those who were slain by the same ignorance that they're displaying to this day. This is a good one. I almost want to make it a different study. Woe unto you, lawyers, for ye have taken away the key of knowledge. Ye entered not in yourselves, and them that were entering in ye hindered. Boy. Where's my, yep, how about that? Oh. Wow, I just, all right, so, the key of knowledge. What is the key of knowledge? The key that opens the door that brings you to the place where you know things, right? He said, you've taken that away. You've taken the key of knowledge. And you didn't go in yourselves. And those that were hindering you, entering in, you hindered. It's an analogy, a picture, right? There's this door. And it goes to the place where we know God, essentially. That's the key of knowledge. I think that's the kind of knowledge. The knowledge of God. We know the will of God, the righteousness of God, the holiness of God, the will of God, the things that God wants us to do, the way to be the most critical kind of knowledge. Not the kind of knowledge like 1 + 1 = 2. A triangle of sides 3 and 4 has a hypotenuse of 5, and that kind of knowledge, how gravity works, the formula for relativity, etc., etc. is not the kind of knowledge we expect to find behind this door. We expect to find the kind of knowledge that gives life from God. So this, I don't know how to put it. They're the gatekeepers of knowledge, of knowing about these things. Which means what? They are holding the key. They are the gatekeepers. And so, what it is, you go to them to get knowledge. You know what I mean? That's like a pastor. They are kind of the gatekeepers of knowledge. You go to church to be informed, to be instructed in the ways of God, in the things of the scriptures. To know what they teach, to know what the Lord teaches, what the Lord wants from you, how you might be a better Christian, whatever, all that stuff. And what he's saying is, you're the gatekeepers. You're supposed to be, you've taken that key, and instead of opening the door and letting people in and showing them the way in, you've taken it away so that no one can get, instead you've taken it away. It sort of like implies they could get in without you. And that's true. I'm entirely self-taught. Now, like, I can teach the Bible. I have knowledge. I obtained it without the assistance of systematic religion and seminaries and all that stuff, right? I've been doing it the hard way, I guess. I don't have instruction in all those things. Some people like that. It's Because how else are you ever going to get a fresh perspective unless you get someone whose mind is not all filled with the same stuff, studying the same books, the same ideas over and over again. And not that the ideas aren't tried and true. And I've had, like I said, it's the hard way. I had to come up through understanding a different way. But then people would say, like, well, like for years you were not properly Trinitarian. Though in some respect, I was very close to it all the time. You had to have an apologist come and argue with you and convince you. Okay. Like, I guess if I'd gone to university, I just would have accepted that, right? Maybe so. But every one of them, like the fact that I was convinced outside of that system, people like that. Trinitarians like that. Everyone loves a convert. I see YouTube channels. On my other channel, I have a subscription to, like, I'll mention Patrick Coffin Media, right? And he has some interesting interviews, but he's all about the Catholic faith, all about Catholicism, right? And they always love when they can bring on Protestant minister converts to Catholicism. Protestant this and such converts to Catholicism. They love that. Love those guys. Doesn't matter that for years they weren't Catholic. It's like, but now they are. Same thing with a lot of things. People love a convert. Like someone could be a Democrat their whole life, screaming for abortion, whatever, but then they become a Republican, and the Republican, oh, we love you. You're Republican now. Especially if they change their mind about critical issues. Sometimes even if they don't, they still rejoice. Someone's on our side. So the world is filled with this sort of like, hey, you got to come in our way, right? You got to get our knowledge. Well, in some sense, the gatekeepers become, like the source of knowledge. And they have the power to corrupt knowledge. And so where it becomes like in the analogy, it's not like they're, you may be going to seminary and learning about the Bible, et cetera, but you're not really getting any knowledge. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening in every seminary and every religious, it happens in church a lot. I don't know what they teach in seminary, but I do know what they teach in church, right? And I think what happens is that in some sense, though they have been educated in a seminary, which I can only assume is some sort of good education, they have some sort of sense of the right doctrines, right? Most of them. I mean, I've debated pastors about stuff. I had a debate with a 6-hour discussion with a pastor about hell, which you can find on my website. On where is it on that page? Let me just. It's not on. Oh yeah, it's on the page I was showing before, the studies page on the bottom, very bottom of the studies page on the left side. There's a discussion on the subject of hell. It's a 6.5-hour discussion, back and forth. And if you listen, it's like, I don't, though he makes some arguments that you could say are pretty good, it's not like he's I'm obviously much more prepared for this argument than he is. And that's whatever that is. My point is, like, on some level, they teach them well, but, like, there are specialists, let's say, who can do even better, like an apologist or something like that, because they're really studying and making the arguments. But then again, an apologist is just someone who's skilled in defending certain arguments. Whether or not they're all right is another question, because, if it's your job to debate a subject, your job is not to be convinced of the other side. You know what I mean? That's not how debates work. Though, when I go to a debate, I look at it like that. It's like I could change my mind right in the middle of this thing, because I'm not a practiced debater. Oh, I've practiced debate a bit, but what I mean is, like, I'm not in it. Like, I have a different idea of what it means to win. To me, to win is to be right, not to make everyone else think you're right. It's to be right, to have the truth. Somewhere along the lines in all of our systematic education, our textbooks and stuff, I think the truth, we lose sight of it, of what the real truth is, what the real knowledge is. Like I've said often, to me, the knowledge of how I can live my life rightly in obedience to Christ, like how one does that, is a much more precious kind of knowledge than a proper understanding of the Trinity. You know what I mean? It is much more precious. Like, you can be totally Christian and not really understand how to explain the Trinity at all. You know what I mean? You don't have to know how to explain that. You don't. If you put your faith in Christ, the Son of God, and don't substitute some other weird thing. If you don't understand, you don't understand it. But know that Christ, your Savior, is divine and all that, you know. The Son of God. There is some, you know, like there's some knowledge. But some of the most critical knowledge, like you said, judgment and the love of God, they've taken away. Because they are the gatekeepers. Because a pastor determines what you know because he sits up there and decides what you hear. You come to church, you've come to the door. And he takes and he slips the key out of the door and doesn't talk about the most needful things. Instead, he talks about what he wants you to hear about. Instead, he talks about things that maybe aren't profitable. Whatever. But they're taking the key of knowledge away so that you don't find out what you need to know by being the gatekeeper and by then saying, well, let's never mind what's behind that door for now. Let's go over here and talk about this. You know, when I first started studying the Bible, I was a student of Arnold Murray in the Shepherd's Chapel. And I don't talk about it tons in this study. I mean, I mention it from time to time. I do because it is just the way I came up. It was the most formal education I got. And there was so much falsehood in it. But it was kind of like, you know, I mean, it was learning by what's wrong with this picture. You know, like you learn about the truth by figuring out what's wrong sometimes, right? And so there's a lot of useful things I learned. One of the things was, you know, with Shepherd's Chapel people, and I get these questions from time to time from them and others. They'll say, what about the angels that sinned? What about what about the Nephilim? What is that? And what's the truth concerning that? As if the truth concerning that is anything that is really behind that door of knowledge. You know what I mean? That's what's really behind there. That's what people are locking up. Because he used to act like that. Like there's this big cover-up. No one wants you to know that the angels had sex with women and had children, and those were the giants. They're covering that up. Nobody wants you to know. It's too salacious and to talk about, as everyone talks about it, and everybody's heard of it. Not everybody, but I mean, I don't know. When I was 18, I thought, I've never heard tell such things. But it didn't take long. Start listening, you start hearing it. I'm not going to answer that. I'm not doing a very good job hanging up either. I just didn't want to keep ringing in the middle of my Bible study. Let's see. Is my cell phone around? Let's see. Now it's making me think, was that related to my stream? Well, we won't know. Well, I don't know. Okay, so that was an interruption anyways. So, they need to go in themselves. They don't have the true knowledge. They don't go into that door. They spend all their time out here dealing with these other things like, the angels that sinned, and the and the seeds of this, and the genealogies of who, and where did the tribes migrate to, and you get caught up in all these issues that are sort of your pet issues, this like Adventists, I've been encountering them. The Sabbath is Saturday, and you shouldn't eat pork. Like I never heard that. It's knowledge. That's what people start feeling like. I've learned something new. I shouldn't eat certain foods. I should be in church on Saturday and not Sunday. And it gives this illusion of knowledge. There are people heading, I want to go hear from God. I want to know what the truth is. And I'm going to go to church to do it. And I go, and then the pastor's sitting there. He's the gatekeeper. He has the key too. You know why? Because his credentials, in a sense, like, people don't want to listen to me. I mean, let's see how many people listen to this. Although, it's grown a little bit. I mean, whatever, fine. I don't speak because I want people to, well, I speak because I need it, because words must be spoken. And yes, I want people to hear them, of course. But it's like, that's not going to, just because nobody listens, there's no reason for me to stop talking. It's funny. Just because nobody's listening, there's no reason to stop talking. No, not at all. Not that nobody, I mean, I'm saying, it's like, oh, I need lots of people to hear. It's such an important message. People who are willing to hear, I treasure the people who are willing to hear. I treasure the people who are willing to hear the important things. That's fine. It doesn't need to be, of course, everyone likes to see people, it feels good to have a crowd with you. You know what I mean? But that's the same thing that leads to stoning people and to other things. It's like, it's best to set our hearts on good things, like on being right, and it doesn't matter how many people hear it, though it is good. The more people to hear it, that is good. That's very good. So we'll finish this chapter tomorrow. We're well over. And let's see. They urge and provoke him to speak of many things. Yeah, well, we could start there. I really wish I almost want to spend more time on this. The key of now. I mean, like, if I was a pastor, I could preach all Sunday for like 2 hours on this verse alone. You know what I mean? And there's not, I got to get going. And I don't want to burden people. It's already an hour to listen to a day. So thanks for joining me, those of you who do. And we'll be back again tomorrow. I look forward to it as always. Until then.
Fill ye up then the measure of your father. Ye serpents, ye offspring of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you